Chapter 7 of Tractate Shabbos finally goes through and explains the 39 malachos, the 39 forms of work which are forbidden on Shabbos, which are really the main bulk in regards to the practical laws of Shabbos. Beforehand, however, it's going to go through the rules for inadvertently violating them, so with that said, the first Mishnah of Chapter 7. Okay, a major rule regarding Shabbos. If you forget about Shabbos and its laws and violate many different Shabbosim by doing many forms of work on each Shabbos, you're only liable to bring one Chattas offering to the temple to cover everything. If you know about Shabbos but accidentally violated it once, but repeatedly on a bunch of different Shabbosim, you're liable to bring a sacrifice to the temple for each of the Shabbosim. Similarly, if you know it's Shabbos and violated the laws of Shabbos many times on the same Shabbos, you're liable to bring a different Chattas offering for each form of work performed. Also, there are 39 categories of work, called avos, fathers, and each of those have subcategories called toldos, children. So it says that if you violate a main category, and also several of its subcategories, you're again only liable for one Chattas offering in the temple. Okay, the Gemara discusses why exactly this is being referred to as a major rule. After a bit of discussion, it basically says that it's because it has a more severe punishment than the laws of the sabbatical year, as the laws of Shabbos apply to detached and attached produce, while the sabbatical year applies just to attached produce. However, by the sabbatical year, it also refers to it as a major rule, as that has similar comparative severity, being that it applies to human and animal food, unlike the laws of Meiser tithes, which apply only to human food. Some take this even further, that by Meiser tithes, it also refers to it as a major rule, as those apply to figs and vegetables, unlike the Peah charity, which does not. And then there's some argument as to what exactly is meant by somebody who forgot about Shabbos. Initially we suggest it's a tinuk shenishpa, which is a child who was captured when he was young, so therefore never really learned the laws of the Torah, and generally isn't really responsible for the laws of the Torah. However, the wording of he forgot implies that he knew about it beforehand at some point, so it's agreed that it actually refers to a person who knew about Shabbos and then for whatever reason forgot about it. But it does amend, according to one opinion, that status of a kid who was captured and never learned these laws does have these same laws apply to him. Another opinion disagrees and says he's totally exempt, as the kid is totally not at fault, and they cite verses which imply like their opinion. This is argued a bit further, at length, citing opinions and proofs and disproofs. It also discusses some particular cases, like of swearing oaths, non-Kohanim eating teruma, and similar, just generally in regards to the opinions and penalties of these issues. Okay, new point, if you're wandering in the desert or something, and you don't know when Shabbos is, one opinion says from that point you count 6 days, and the 7th day will be your Shabbos, like the creation of the world. The other opinion says that you have Shabbos and then count 6 days, like the creation of Adam, that the day after was Shabbos. We bring sources which prove like the first opinion. It's explained that daily practice in such a situation should be to only work the bare minimum to stay alive during all 7 days. Just, you'd say the Kiddush and Havdalah prayers before and after Shabbos. If you know which day you left on, so that one definitely wasn't Shabbos, you can work on that day of the week. You can't assume that you weren't traveling on Friday, and therefore you should be able to work your day and the next day, as sometimes people did travel on Friday, if there was a caravan available. It also discusses the verses which source the rulings in this Mishnah. It also lists the source for many of the 39 malachos, the forms of work, which are tradition passed down from Mount Sinai. It says, these are the things in the verse, wherein it explains how you can derive a lot of numerical equivalents from the verse to get to 39. It also specifies the prohibition against kindling in the Torah. Specifically, some say to specify and designate it as a slightly lesser status as a prohibition, as opposed to all the other ones, which you'd get stoned if you violated them. Some say it's specified to separate each of the 39 into distinct categories of liability. The verse is argued about a bit to determine who it implies more like. Then it discusses what if somebody simultaneously forgot about Shabbos and about the work. Some say there's variance if you remember that it's Shabbos, in which case he's only liable for one violation, or he remembers that he's doing work, in which case he's liable for each of the variations of work. Others disagree and say he's only liable for one violation overall. This is argued further. This gets into a bit of a longer point about people doing multiple violations of Shabbos laws and multiple violations under the same category under one lapse of awareness, things of that nature. This discussion continues on a bit, citing many opinions on the topic. It also discusses similar concepts outside of the laws of Shabbos in regards to, say, multiple violations in regards to the laws of intimacy and similar. This discussion finally gets into an important principle in regards to the laws of Shabbos, in regards to inadvertently violating a form of work on Shabbos while trying to do something else. For instance, if you want to pick up something up off the ground and while doing so, accidentally pull, say, a vegetable out of the ground. There's a violation of Shabbos, of the work of reaping, but you're exempt because of this circumstance. However, if you're trying to cut something detached from the ground and you cut something attached, which is not allowed, there's no argument. Some say you're exempt as you didn't intend to do a prohibited act of cutting, others say you're liable as you did intend to cut something. They bring proofs which are debated, including points about worshipping idols inadvertently in similar circumstances. There's a similar argument about throwing something. If you intended to throw it 2 amos, cubits, which is allowed, and accidentally threw it 4 amos, which is the minimum for it to not be allowed, the first opinion would say you're exempt, and the second liable for basically the same reasons. The same argument exists if you were throwing something in what you thought was a private domain and it turns out to be public. All 3 of these cases need to be brought, because the first case is where you didn't intend a prohibited act at all, the second is where the prohibited act includes half the action he made, and the third where he fully did the prohibited act and just didn't realize the circumstances. So we need all those cases to say the first opinion holds he's exempt by all of these. In the Mishnah we're about to cite, it's prefaced by saying that there are 39 forms of forbidden labor on Shabbos. It prefaced by saying the number, according to one opinion, to teach that if you violate all 39 in one lapse of awareness, you're liable to bring a chatas offering for every single one of them. One opinion holds that you're exempt if you know about Shabbos and knows about the malachos, but was just unaware that he did the actions in the amount over the minimum threshold. So according to him, this must be referring to where he knows about Shabbos, but it was inadvertent in regards to the work. According to one opinion, the circumstance of the case must be where he didn't know that any of the 39 malachos were prohibited. So how could the circumstance be that he's liable to bring a chatas offering for each performed action? So we answer that he could have been aware of the techum laws, according to the opinion that they're biblical, so that's sufficient to have him be aware of the Shabbos, and therefore he's liable for each of the inadvertent malachos. Okay, new Mishnah, a very important one. In accordance to the forms of work done in the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, there are a list of forms of labor, which total 39. They are sowing, plowing, reaping, gathering, threshing, winnowing, selecting, grinding, sifting, kneading, baking, which are all the labors required to make bread, shearing, whitening, disentangling, dyeing, spinning, mounting a warp on a loom, setting the 2 heddles on a loom, weaving 2 threads on a loom, removing 2 threads on a loom, tying a knot, untying a knot, sewing 2 stitches, tearing to sew 2 stitches, which are all the labors required to make clothing, trapping an animal, slaughtering it, skinning, salting, tanning, smoothing it, cutting, writing 2 letters, erasing in order to write 2 letters, building, demolishing, extinguishing, kindling, striking the final blow, and carrying from one domain to another. So, those are the 39 forms of work, the 39 malachos, which are forbidden to perform on Shabbos. As explained, I prefaced by saying the number 39, according to one opinion, to teach that if you violate all 39 in one lapse of awareness, you're liable to bring a chatas offering for every single one of them. So, let's go through them. First, why say sowing before plowing if you generally plow first in the order of things? It's because it was taught in Israel, where the earth is very hard, so they sow then plow a second time. Included within sowing is pruning, planting, propagating, and grafting, which are all forbidden on Shabbos, and it's taught to show that if you do many labors similar to one of the main 39, you're only liable for 1 chatas. Specifically, if you prune, you're liable for planting. Planting, propagating, and grafting are an issue of planting and sowing. If you prune and need the wood for fuel, you're liable for both reaping and planting. If you cut a specific plant that grows back very quickly, you'd be liable for reaping and planting. If you cut beets, which grow back after being cut, you'd be liable for reaping and planting. Okay, next was plowing. Included are digging a hole and making a furrow. If you have a mound of dirt or a hole and you remove it or fill it in, if it was inside your house, you're liable for building. If it was in a field, you're liable for plowing. According to one opinion, if you dig a hole, but not for the hole, only because you need the dirt, you'd be exempt, as even according to the opinion that says it's forbidden to do a forbidden labor, but not for its defined purpose, that would only apply if you're rectifying something, whereas here, you're ruining something. Okay, next was reaping. Included is cutting grapes, harvesting dates, collecting olives, and gathering figs. If you throw some dirt at a palm tree and sever some dates, you're liable for both detaching and extracting. Others disagree by both, as it's not the normal manner of doing either of those. Next was gathering. One opinion says this includes gathering salt from salt ditches. Others disagree, saying it only applies to things that grow from the ground. Next was threshing. Included is beating flax and striking cotton. Winnowing, selecting, grinding, and sifting are next, which are listed as separate things as they were separate by the Mishkan. Pounding is not included in the list, as some poor people eat their bread without pounding their wheat first. Next was selecting, or sorting, which has some very important qualifications. We offer a number of exceptions based on a source. Some say you can select for yourself or somebody else for today, but not for tomorrow. Some say that you can select less than the minimum amount. Some say that you can only do it by hand. Some say that you can only select the good food from the waste, while some say it's only allowed for immediate use. A lot of these have issues with them. Some rule more stringently if you're using a utensil specifically used for sorting, such as a sieve. There was another case where a bunch of students were visiting a teacher and he spread out a basket of fruits all over the table, and they weren't sure if he was doing that just because he held removing food from waste is forbidden, or he was just trying to be generous with his food. Also, selecting lupine beans from their water is not allowed, and this is an exception to the allowance of food from waste, as lupine beans have some unique qualities explained by the commentaries that you have to boil them 7 times, and it spoils if not removed from the shell, so it's considered actually like removing waste from food. Okay, next was grinding. Someone includes mincing beets in this, others add chopping chips of wood, and others qualify this to be if he's particular about the size of the chips. Kneading and baking are listed instead of cooking herbs, which was done in the Mishkan because we're going according to the order of making bread. Included is putting a peg in an oven to harden it as it first softens and then hardens. Heating pitch is also forbidden, even though it will eventually reharden. If you make an earthenware barrel, that's violating 7 of these: grinding, sorting, sifting, kneading, smoothing, kindling, and baking. And if you make an oven, that's 8, including striking the final blow. It also gives the example of making a reed basket of a sort, which would make you liable for 11, and if you add a border to the basket, that'll be 13. In regards to shearing and whitening, if you spin wool while it's on the actual animal, some say you're liable for shearing, disentangling, and spinning. Others say no, as that's not the normal manner of doing those. They actually did that by the Mishkan, but that's an exceptional action done by exceptional people. Also, plucking feathers from a bird is an issue of shearing, clipping it is an issue of cutting, and pulling off its hairs is an issue of smoothing. The issue of tying is based on the tying and untying of the nets of the chilazoin fish, whose dye was used for the Mishkan. It wasn't tying the curtains onto the tents, as that was tying in order to untie, and it wasn't re-tying the broken threads on the curtain, as that just looks bad and wouldn't have been done. Sewing 2 stitches is provided he ties the ends of the threads afterwards. Tearing was done in the Mishkan. If a worm ate a hole on a curtain, they tore it a bit and then resewed it. Okay, a few miscellaneous laws. According to one opinion, stretching the thread of a stitch on Shabbos is forbidden, and if you learn from a heretic, you're liable for death. And if you know how to calculate the astronomical progression of the seasons, and you don't, it's forbidden to learn Torah from you. Also, you're allowed to learn sorcery in order to rule laws on its regard. In regards to trapping, if you trap a chilazin fish and squeeze it for its dye, some say you're liable for trapping, some also for threshing, based on if you hold squeezing is included there, not just to things that grow from the ground. This is either where the fish was already dead, so that's not an additional liability, or that's just not an issue as you were preoccupied with a different act. Normally that'd still be an issue due to the principle of psikresha, that according to some, you're not allowed to do an action on Shabbos if the forbidden consequence is inevitable, meaning it's definitely going to happen. But that doesn't apply here, as you don't want the fish to die, as the blood dye is better quality while the fish is alive. In regards to slaughtering, which was the next on the list, some say that the issue is of dyeing the flesh from the blood along with killing, while others say it's just an issue of killing something. The issue of dyeing the skin here, which would need to be a desired action, is that the meat looks freshly slaughtered and people will buy from you, hence it's actually something wanted. Salting and tanning are kind of the same thing, so some say to remove one and add tracing lines as one of them. Some say salting meat is an issue of tanning, others say it doesn't apply to food. Fine, so the argument is if you're salting the meat for travel, where unlike my home use, you heavily salt it. It says that walking in between pillars in order to clear the dirt in an area is an issue of smoothing. Sharpening the top of poles is an issue of cutting. Spreading a dressing on a wound is an issue of spreading. And chiseling a stone is an issue of striking the final blow. Other issues of striking the final blow are assuming you're particular about them, engraving an image on a utensil, blowing a glass utensil, and removing unwanted protrusions from a garment. Next was writing 2 letters. If you write a letter the size of 2 letters, it's not an issue, but if you erase that letter, leaving a space big enough for 2 letters, that's not allowed. The final act of a labor is an issue of striking the final blow. In addition, based on the wording of a Mishnah, you're not liable for a subcategory of these if you're already liable for its main category. We also exclude lining warp threads with a rod on a loom and beating the weft threads, as those are included in the other loom-related malachos. And basically, based on those 39, determine most of the laws of Shabbos, practically at least. Anything and everything that is or isn't forbidden is predominantly based on those listed things. Okay, new Mishnah, another general rule. Anything that is generally stored, and the amount in question is generally stored, if you carry it on Shabbos, you're liable, even if it's not an item that you care about. If it doesn't have those qualifications and you carry it on Shabbos, you're liable if you yourself store it. The Gemara mentions that this idea of being fit to store excludes either menstrual blood or wood of the idolatrous Asherah tree. According to the one who holds that blood is an issue, that definitely includes the Asherah tree. However, according to the opinion that holds it's the Asherah tree wood, that wouldn't include menstrual blood because that's sometimes eaten by cats. The other person says not to do that as it could make you weak. Others disagree. New Mishnah. If you carry processed straw, the minimum for it to be an issue is a cow's mouthful. Straw from beans, a camel's mouthful. Straw, a lamb's mouthful. Grass, a kid's mouthful. Garlic and onion leaves, if fresh, the size of a dried fig is the minimum. If dry, a kid's mouthful. None of these listed can combine because the measurements are dissimilar. These measurements are argued a bit over in the Gemara, and there are some points in regards to the laws of impurity. New Mishnah. Some more minimums of issues with carrying food the size of a dried fig. Foods can combine because they have similar measurements in this regard, besides for their shells, pits, stems, coarse bran, and fine bran. Rabbi Yehuda says that you can combine the measurements of shells, but not with lentil shells, as those are cooked with the lentils. The Gemara explains that bran can't be combined because poor people eat bread with unrefined flour. This is all speaking of old produce, and old bean shells don't combine with their beans because they look like flies and no one wants to eat them, so they're not combined. Okay, and that's the end of Chapter 7.